Well, good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Joe. I'm the student pastor here, and every once in a while they let me out to share some things, and I think it just keeps me sane because over there I go nuts. And so, thank you for letting me come out this morning. Well, hey, as Tori said, we've been working through forgiveness, and we went through and we call it the F series, so that whenever you see a Ford F series truck on the road, for me, it's because they usually cut me off, and then I think, oh, I need to forgive that person. Or they're flapping all the juice and mud up on my little tiny car I have, and I got to forgive them. But we thought it would be really neat to name it the F Series because as you see them, we always think, man, there's just as many F Series trucks are on the road as usually how many times I need to forgive myself and ask forgiveness for myself for things that I've done. And so I think that happens to a lot of us. And so we thought that'd be kind of neat. But we went through the series and we had F-150, we had the F-250, we had the F-350 last week, and Reed was saying, man, this is getting heavy. This is a lot of stuff. And if you've ever seen an F-350, it can haul some stuff. Well, this week, it's F-450. That's a big truck. Like, we usually don't see them that much. But you know what? For me, it's not big enough. F-Series goes all the way to, at this point, the F-750. That's a little closer to what I need, I think, sometimes, for the offenses that I have done, and sometimes it feels like the things that have been done to me. And I think a lot of us might be in that boat. And so today we're going to talk about that a little bit, and we're going to talk about how heavy some of this stuff is that we need to release and to let go. And it just dawned on me, I forgot Reed's little brick that I was going to use, and I don't know where it went. He said it was up here. So anyway, and I'm confused by that thing because it looks like it's actually like 1,000 little bricks. So I don't know if it's actually one big brick or if it's actually a bunch of little bricks. But when he's holding the brick and he's sharing that with us, he talks about these things. And I wanted to recap a couple of things really quick for us because this might be the first time, and you're coming in at an F-750 series type thing, and you might feel like, man, this is more than I expected coming in today. And so over the course of this, we realized there are a couple of things that forgiveness is not. And what forgiveness is not condoning the offense. Forgiveness is not forgetting the offense. Forgiveness is not reconciling the offense. And it's not immediate sometimes. And so we're not saying that you have to forget this stuff and you got to let it go. We're not saying that at all. We're not saying that you're condoning the action that was done upon you in any way. And we're not saying that you're completely forgetting about it. And it might take time, and we understand that. And so please don't misinterpret that when we talk about forgiveness. But I was coming in, I was away at a conference on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday last week. And I came in, and I was actually kind of excited to come back and see how much stuff was in the truck bed out in the front lobby here. And I came in, and I thought, man, we are either an awesome church because we don't have any offenses against anybody, or nobody's done anything to us, or we're really good at forgiving already, or we're just not doing this thing. Because there's like 10 things out there, and one of them's a teddy bear, which is cute. And I'm like, what happened to that guy? Like that, but that could be really, not the teddy bear, but that, and then I started thinking, man, there's some heavy stuff probably involved with that. And that's huge. But for some reason, there's only like 10 things out there. So that leads me to 3 conclusions. And I thought, okay, there's 3 things that maybe would lead us to possibly thinking that there's only a couple of things out there. And it's either one, we don't believe this is really the way it works. We don't believe in this. We don't believe that there is a way that we can actually forgive and trust is number 2. Maybe we just don't trust that God's plan works with forgiveness. And then number 3 would be, I do believe. I believe that He's given us a way. I trust that way would work. But guys, seriously, I'm kind of stuck because honestly, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to let go of this. I don't know how to release this thing that's happened to me. And so I'm sure there's more reasons that we could have come up with why there wasn't, like some of you are like, I'm not bringing in anything heavy. But that's fine. But these are the 3 that I thought maybe these are the 3 main things that people are still dealing with as we walk through this. And so if belief is one of them, then I think that we can deal with that. And it might be these three things. And some of you guys might be thinking, I don't believe that this forgiveness thing really works. Some of you might be saying, I don't believe God will handle this the right way. Some of you might just be in the part that says, I don't believe God. And if you're in those circumstances, there's usually a reason. There's usually a reason if we don't believe in something. Like somebody can say, I believe Joe's real. He's right here. I can see him. But if you knew me, there might be some things that you would be like, I don't believe Joe's going to follow through. My wife can attest to this. Because I love to start things. Like I thoroughly love to start things. I love, like we're in the middle of a house project right now, and I loved starting that house project. And right now I'm having a lot of trouble finishing that house project. And I think a lot of us might be in that same road. And I think my wife is not believing that I'm ever going to finish this house project. And so I think we can struggle in some of the areas that way. But one of the things, so if we aren't believing, it's usually for a reason. So I started thinking, is there a reason that God has ever given us to not believe in him? When I was 10, I was in Cleveland visiting my relatives. And my uncle Ed, who is a guy that he's passed away now, but he was so incredibly special to me. He is the reason that I think I understand relational ministry. Like everywhere we would ever go, he knew the person. I don't know how, but when we got there, it seemed like he knew him, and I thought he really knew him. I'm like, how do you know everybody everywhere we go? Whatever golf course he took me to, he knew them. Whatever convenience store we happened to stop into, he seemed like he knew the people. And he'd go up to the counter, and he'd always like lean on the counter. Like if you were behind my Uncle Ed, you hated him. But if you were with him, you loved him. He'd lean on the counter. He'd look at their name tag, and Stacy, how you doing today? How's things going? I mean, it was just, and I learned how to be relational from just watching my Uncle Ed. Well, one time, my Uncle Ed came up to me and he said, hey, Jojo, that's what they called me when I was little. And he said, hey, Jojo, do you want to go bowling today? I'm like, yeah. I was like 9, 10 years old. I thought, man, that'd be awesome, because I wanted to do whatever Uncle Ed wanted to do. Like, I just wanted to be with him. And he said, let's go bowling. And I don't even, at this point, I don't remember, I loved Uncle Ed so much, I don't remember if anybody else went with us, because I can't remember in my memory, because I remember Uncle Ed. And so we went bowling, and I'll never forget this. We walk into the bowling alley, and Uncle Ed's in front, and I'm kind of trailing behind, and all of a sudden I hear all this, like, boo. And I'm like, what in the world? Like, what? Like, somebody doesn't like people here. This is weird. And then all I hear, and I hear this, I hear, Steelers, well, I'm going to clean. Steelers aren't very nice. Steelers are a bad team. And I'm like, what? Like, what is going on? I'm wearing my prized possession. I'm 9, 10 years old. I'm wearing my prized possession Steelers jacket. And I'm walking into a bowling alley in Cleveland. And I am getting crushed. And to this day, I love my Uncle Ed. I hate the Cleveland Browns with a passion. And here's why. Because that one reason set forth a turn of events that I have continued to hate the Cleveland Browns. If you're a Cleveland Browns fan, I'm sorry. There's a lot of other teams. Like, you can choose. You've got a lot of choices. Some of you are thinking, yeah, the Steelers aren't any better, buddy. But here's the thing. Like, I grew in that. When I was in high school, the Browns got probably the best that they've ever been was around that area of time. And they went to the AFC Championship a bunch of times. And I remember specifically watching this one game. Some of you are probably like, but I remember watching this one game. And what happened was they handed it off. They looked like they were going to win. They were going to go to the Super Bowl for the first time. And they handed it off to this guy, Biner. And he's running. He was a great running back at the time. And he hands it off, and he's running. He gets to like the 1 or 2 yard line, and he drops the ball. And they lose. Oh, no, it's not sad. It was good. Like, he dropped the ball, and the Browns lose the game, and they're out of the playoffs. They don't go to the Super Bowl. The Denver Broncos went. And I jumped up in my house as a teenager. I jumped on, like, yes! Yes, that's awesome! And so I figured this is a great story to talk about forgiveness and everything, because I was so crushed. I was hurt by these Browns. But I was so happy. But here's the deal. People to this day still don't, even in Cleveland, they don't believe that the Browns are ever going to get to the Super Bowl. Why? Because they drop the ball all the time. They always, in their organization and all this kind of stuff, I'm going to get a bunch of emails from this one, but like they drop the ball and they just let you down. And it's like, oh. And, there's probably some Cub fans right now this year that are like, man, this is it. This is the year they start. I mean, they're hot coming out of the gates, but there's some part in the back of these minds in Chicago, some people are like, they're going to drop the ball. Like, it's going to happen. But, guys, here's the thing. So I thought, if there's a reason that people don't believe in something, it's usually because somebody along the lines has dropped the ball. And if we don't believe in God, then it has to be that God has dropped the ball somewhere. And so I went back in Scripture, and I'm looking through the Bible, and I'm going back. And I start looking at different things in Exodus where he leads them out of Egypt. And, he leads this whole group out of Egypt, and they come up to this big thing of water. And they're like, God, you failed us. You let us out. We can't go back because there's this huge Egyptian army coming after us in this dust cloud. And we can't go forward because you led us right into some water that we can't go this way or this way around. God, you dropped the ball. Oh. Hey, let's just split the water. Go right through it. Oh. And they walk through on dry land. And the water collapses and crushes the Egyptians. You see, he didn't drop the ball. He came through. Here's one of my favorite stories in Scripture. I thought, okay, so obviously I blew it there. I didn't find him dropping the ball on that one. And so 1 Kings 18 is where, you don't have to turn there. I'll just walk through it real quick. But in 1 Kings 18, there's a prophet Elijah. And Elijah is kind of, at the moment in Israel, is not a well-liked guy. Because about 3 years prior to this, he said, it's not going to rain until I let it rain. Because he was so offended by some things that happened there. Like, not for himself, but for God. He was offended because of his belief in God and these people that are supposed to be God's people that aren't believing in him. And he says, I'm not going to let it rain for 3 years. Until I say so. He didn't even say how long. He said, until I say so, it's not going to rain. So it got to this point about 3 years later where he was so hated, he was out living in a cave somewhere because he couldn't be amongst the people. And the king at the time was Ahab, not to be confused with the guy that was after the big whale. But he was the king at the time here, and he said, hey, go out and search for Elijah everywhere. Everywhere you go, any country around us, go look for this guy because I need to talk to him because my country is dying. And so they sent all these things out, and they couldn't find him, and they come back. And then all of a sudden, one day, Elijah, listening to God, says, okay, the time's come. And he comes out of his cage. He wasn't in a cage. He comes out of his cave, and he's walking over, and he's seen, and they make a meeting between him and Ahab. And Ahab says, hey, what are you doing to us? He's like, it's not me that's doing anything to you. It's yourself that's doing stuff to you. Here, let me prove to you that God is who he said he is and that you can believe in him. And he says, do this. He said, you want to worship these other two gods out there. You want to worship them? Here, bring all of their priests, 450 prophets from Baal, the god of Baal, 400 prophets from Asherah. He says, bring them all here, and oh, by the way, invite everybody in Israel, and let's go up on top of Mount Carmel. And so the whole people of Israel come. 850 priests of these other gods are up on top of this mountain. And there's Elijah, the only priest left serving God, Yahweh. And so he says, here's what I want you to do. We're going to go up on top, and we're all here, and now we have two bulls, because we're going to sacrifice to your gods that you think are real, and I'm going to sacrifice to my God that I know is real. And here's how I want you to do it. I want you to make an altar, put on all this wood. You guys pick a bull first, because there's more of you. You pick whichever bull you think would glorify your God better, and you guys go ahead and set up your sacrifice and get it ready. It's like, all right, no problem, let's do this. So it's early in the morning. They get everything going. They throw the bull on the sacrifice, and they say, all right, so they start, 850 start yelling and running around and praying and chanting and calling out to their God, and nothing happens. Because what Elijah said is what's going to happen is the one that is the real God will send down fire from heaven and sacrifice, and he'll burn this offering. He'll provide the fire. That's how we'll know who the real God is. So they're saying, send it down. Come on, Baal, send it down. And they're doing all this stuff, and they're chanting, and they're rolling around, and they're going crazy. And it comes to noon. It's been like 3 hours, 4 hours roughly. And it comes to noon And Elijah says this. I love this part. It's just fun. I just love this. But he comes to him and he says, hey, guys, 850 of them. There's one of him. And he says, hey, maybe you're just not yelling loud enough. Because maybe your God is sleeping. Or maybe he's like on a walk. He just kind of walked out of range for a little bit. And you got to yell louder. You got to do more stuff. Because maybe he's away deep in thought. And he's kind of making fun of him a little bit. It's because he believes, and he knows that God's never dropped the ball. And so he says, all right. So they're like, okay, you're right. Yeah, you're right. We got to do more. And they start yelling more and louder, and they're walking around. Then they start cutting themselves so that blood, it says, is flowing of 850 of these priests. And then nighttime comes, and it's time for the sacrifice. Nothing's happening. They're worn out. They're tired. Their God has not answered them. And Elijah steps up and he says, okay, let me have a chance. So he takes the bull that's left over, and he puts it on an altar that they built of firewood. And then before, he says, hey, guys, some of you guys from Israel, go get me 4 or 5 large jugs of water and pour them over the sacrifice. And then let the water fall to the ground and fill up this little ditch that I built all the way around the altar. So it's soaking wet. It's not going to light, right? It's not going to fire up. You can't fire that. It's soaking wet firewood, soaking wet bull, soaking wet water and ground. And then he says a prayer. And he says, Lord, let them know you are God. And the fire comes flying out of heaven, hits the bull, consumes everything, and it says it even licked up all the water and left dry land. And it says at that moment, the people fell prostrate and said, the Lord, He is God. Folks, our God does not drop the ball. You can look. You can go through here, all through here. You can go through the New Testament here. He never drops the ball. He's never given us a reason that we can't believe that what he says about forgiveness and how to do it is true. And so maybe it's not belief. Maybe it's trust. Maybe you're dealing with those issues and you say, I don't trust because I don't want to get hurt again. I don't trust that this is going to work because, honestly, they don't deserve to be forgiven for what they did to me. And some of you guys are dealing with this one, I think. My offense is so huge, I don't think you can take this one. Or what's been done to me is so big and so bad. I don't trust that you can take this. Belief and trust, just to clarify, are two separate things. Somebody can believe in me, but they might not trust me. So these are two different areas that we're dealing with. You might have complete belief that God never drops the ball. But when it comes to trusting him with our stuff to be released, we struggle. Jesus was praying in a garden, and a bunch of Romans came up and said, hey, which one is the guy? One of his good friends turns him over. But that night, all his friends will have deserted him. He's handed over to the court system that we're supposed to trust in, that we're supposed to believe in, and it fails them. And they're sent out to be flogged. And I don't know if you know what flogging is, but it's this thing, it's cat o' nine tails they use, and basically you're strapped over a pole like this, and your hands are tied and bound, and some guys are with this whip that has 9 tails, and it comes out, and it's got bones and clay and rock and all this kind of stuff tied up in it, and they start whipping you, and they hit you. There's a movie that came out quite a while back, and in it, this actor, his name totally left me. I know it, but I can't say it right. But he was over there, and he spoke to us one time when I was on staff with Young Life, and he came and he spoke with us, and he said, Jim Caviezel, and he spoke with us about the movie and the scene where he has to portray Jesus, and he's bent over this pole, and he said, I wanted it to be so lifelike that I wanted them to actually whip me. And so he said, we came up with the conclusion that I'm not a very tough guy. And he said, so we made this metal sheet that would go over his back so that when they whipped him, they could actually hit the metal, and it would look like he was really getting whipped, but he had this metal protection. And so he's over, and he's bound by this. And they said, okay, he was ready. He was pumped up. He was ready for this. And they whip him, and the guy missed the metal. And it came around, and it wrapped around right here. And what happens is when you get whipped by this, it sinks into your skin, and then they rip it back. And when they rip it back, it tears away the skin. One time he was hit with this, he passed out. One time. 39 times Jesus was hit. Then he was beaten on top of that. They made a crown of thorns. These thorns are not like we get pricked with in the backyard and I make a big fuss about it and run in. Ah! These thorns are like this big. And they made a crown of it and they gashed it over his head. He was spit upon. He was forced to carry his own coffin up the hill. When he got there, they laid the coffin, a big log that's rough. It's not sanded down and pretty like the ones we see right here. It's a rough cut log. They lay his flesh open back on that log, and they wrap out his hands, and they nail him through here, and they nail him through the feet. And then they set the cross up. And when they set the cross up, there's a deep hole that is dug. And when they set the cross up, they drop it. And it goes down and it goes bam. And it hits the ground. And when that happens and you're nailed this way, your shoulders pop out of place. He dislocated both shoulders at the same time. And he's hanging on by these nails right here. Raw back, separated shoulder, nails in the hands and feet. And then he's stabbed. And the whole time he's mocked and he's insulted. And he says this. These are the words that he says. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. We're afraid because we don't trust that he can handle this because we don't want to be hurt. And he went through this and was still able to say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. Folks, I don't mean to diminish anything that has ever happened to us at all. But we will never go through what Jesus had to go through. And he still says, Father, forgive them. You know, I can't handle my own sin sometimes. But when Jesus did this on the cross, he did it for the sins of the world. I want you to take a second here and think about, how many times just on the way in, I was sitting at the light out here. It gets me every single time I have to talk. I'm sitting at the light waiting to come in, and I'm going over my notes, and I forget to go when the light turns green. And for some reason, God always puts me first in line. And so the guy right behind me, it might have been literally a half a second, but the guy behind me, and if you're in here, I'm sorry, but the guy behind me hits the horn. He is on. Like, he had cup coffee already. And he got in here, and he's like, that light did not turn green. And there's nothing more that I hate inside than when you get that honk, and I think it's because I'm I'm actually a pretty decent driver, and I was like, he's calling me out. He's saying I'm not a good driver. But, and I'm like, it's not, and I've picked up this habit. Thank you, thank you, I wasn't aware, I was supposed to go on green. But, and so I'm pulling in. It happens every Sunday. Every time I'm supposed to speak here, something like that happens. And I'm coming in, I'm like, I'm horrible. I'm a horrible person because I'm thinking this guy. But that's my sin. That's only my sin that I have to deal with. And sometimes it's overwhelming for me. I want you to do something here. I want you to look down the row that you're sitting in. Some of you guys are in your own row, and you got lucky. But some of you, I want you to sit I want you to look around, and I want you to realize, now what if you had to deal with all the sin of the person sitting next to you and your sin? That's just two. Now, think of your whole row. What if you had to deal with the sin and reconcile it, or not reconcile, but and respond to people and go and apologize sometimes and ask forgiveness of the whole row of everybody that you're sitting? That's a full-time job that we would have to deal with. Now, think about the room. Guys, take it farther. Westminster, only Westminster, just if you had to deal with all the sin of everybody in Westminster. Maybe Carroll County. Maybe the state of Maryland. Whoa. Maybe our country. Oh, okay, wait a minute. What about the world? Jesus died for the sins of the world. Now the next generation. And the next generation. And the generation that's not even born yet. He didn't just die for the immediate folks right then, or else it wouldn't count for us. We're 2,000 years later. All those sins he still died for. Folks, if he can take on all that and then say this, Father, into your hand I commit my soul. Father, the word there is Abba, Daddy. It's like when my little kids used to come up with me with this binky. Aiden is our oldest boy now. He's going to kick me in the shins later. But like he had this binky, pacifier binky, and it was this big round one. And he had this little blanket. And the older he got, the less and less the blanket made it. And so like when he was still pretty little, he would tuck the blanket up under his binky right here. So the binky was here, and this little strand of blanket that was left was here. And he'd walk around all day like that. Like he was this little blanket hanging out right here. But I would come home, and he would come up to me, and he'd be just like, and that just meant, Dad, pick me up. That's the image that we have right here of Jesus saying, Daddy, into your arms, hold me, because I trust you, that you're going to deal with this the right way. If anybody deserved at that moment to not be forgiven, it would be the people that are around that cross crucifying him at that moment. And he could have easily said, Father, crush them. But he said, Father, forgive them. Into your hand I commit my spirit. If he could trust God at that moment, I think we could probably do it. I think he's given us enough reason to trust and to believe. So how do you do it then? Maybe that's the last reason. Maybe we just are at a point, it's kind of like Wile E. Coyote, right? Like he ties up this boulder, and you see him, he's about to throw it off the cliff because he's finally caught the roadrunner, and somehow in between him tying it up, the roadrunner slips it back around the coyote's ankle, and he throws the boulder off the cliff. Some of you guys are like, what? But he throws it off the cliff, and the rock goes flying over the cliff, and he's like, I got you, and all of a sudden he realizes the rope's on his ankle, and he goes away, and there's a little puff left there. I love that. But it's kind of like that. Lord, I'm giving this to you. Oh, it tags me along. I didn't let go of it. And I think we're struck because we don't know how to do this. How do we let go of this? Let's take a little bit of a deeper look at Luke 23, if we could pull that back up in verse 34. We're going to look at this because in these 7 words, Jesus gives us the blueprint of how do we do this. The first word, it says, Father. In some versions, it says, my Father. And we just talked about that. It's the same word that he used a little later when he says, Father, into my spirit, into your hands I commit my spirit. It's the same word, Father, Abba, Daddy. I give you me. But he says it in a way that's Daddy. It's a trust issue. It's showing us that we can trust God. We can believe and we can trust. Just as our little kids run to us when they have the owies, when they need something, they know that they can run to us, and we're going to pick them up, and we're going to hold them in our arms. That's the same image here that he uses. He gives us the blueprint that we can trust him, and we can believe in him. And then he says, forgive them. And you remember the scene. He's on the cross. All these people are jeering. They actually said it's like a party. It's like a crazy party going on. Where do you think they got the wine? They were the ones using the wine when they went to offer it to him. It was this crazy party scene that they were celebrating him up on that cross. And he says, forgive them. Folks, it's in a pleading, forgive them. Because I bet you God was not in a moment where he was saying, I'm going to forgive these people for what they're doing to my son. Look in the Old Testament. God seeks some revenge. And he even says in the New Testament, leave it up to me because I'll do it right. But Jesus intercedes and he says, Father, forgive them. He begs for their forgiveness. He begs God to forgive the people that are crushing him. Folks, we need to beg God to forgive us and to let go help us let go of the offenses that have happened to us. It's that serious. We need to beg him for that. And I'll shed some light on why in a minute. In the third part of the verse, it says, for they do not know what they are doing. How many times have we been completely offended and crushed on a person that doesn't even seem like it bothered them? Sometimes they just don't even know. Why? Because they don't have the same heart that we do. They might not even believe in Christ. And yet we're mad as the world at them. You know, these folks that crucified Jesus on the cross, he prays for them, and he says, Father, forgive them. In Matthew 5, he tells us, not only, he says, you've heard it this way, love your neighbor, hate your enemies. And he says, but I tell you this, love your enemies and pray for them, the ones that persecute you. Then, a little bit later, he lives it out from the cross. He prays for the people that are crushing him, his enemies, and he lifts them up. And then, guys, this is what is amazing. All this time, we have been talking about how we need to release it because of the benefits that it gives us. The relationship is restored, the chance to be back with God in that way, uninhibited by any of our sins or the things that we're holding on to that keep us from experiencing that full life. And it's about us. Here's the crazy thing. When Jesus on the cross is crucified, we see the result of this prayer 6 weeks down the road. In Acts 2, it says this. And I'm just going to go through this fairly quick here. Therefore, Peter is standing up, and he's talking to this crowd of people that just heard all these people talking weird languages. And they're accusing them. The same people that accused Jesus and crucified him are accusing these people of being drunk at 9 in the morning. And Peter's like, no, they're not drunk. They've just been filled with the Spirit. And they're like, what? And it says this, Peter, therefore let all Israel be assured of this, in verse 36, God has made this Jesus whom you crucified. It's the same people. The same people are right here at this moment that were there when Jesus was crucified. This Jesus whom you crucified. It says, when the people heard this, they were cut to the heart and said to Peter and the other apostles, brothers, what shall we do? You see, in Matthew, he says, when you love your enemies and pray for the ones that persecute you, it's like heaping burning coals on their head. These people just got a load of coal dumped on them that was burning because they realized what they had done. When we release this and we forgive others, we give them the opportunity to be opened up to receive Christ. It's not just about us. 3,000 people that were there crucifying Christ came to know him that day because Jesus released them.